Okay, so I'm just gonna share some quotes from a C.S. Lewis book here. Um, the name of the book is A Mind Awake, which is an anthology of C.S. Lewis. So it's a collection of quotes. Um, and yeah, so for those of you who don't know who C.S. Lewis is,
Oh, it actually works.
yeah, it sure does.
Sorry about that.
No, it's good. So C.S. Lewis he was born in like early 1900s. He was a really good man, Christian philosopher. Well, I guess he was born in 1898, so 100 years before me exactly, or a little less than 100 years if we're counting the months. But he was a really good man. He converted from atheism to Christianity, and then he's a very intellectual man, very good writer, very well recognized by his peers even before he became a Christian as a good writer. Worked as a professor at a college, I don't remember which, Oxford, I think it was, in England, and he actually gave a significant portion of his money to charity, a significant portion of his income to charity. I think he lived on like 20% of his income or something. Um, yeah, he's really cool guy, and I just really like it talks in the introduction about how he was the type of person who liked answers a lot more than he liked questions. Um, so yeah, I think that describes me pretty well. So he's a kindred soul, um, in a way. But yeah, so I just need to find some of my favorite. Yeah, so this is the inconsolable longing, section labeled the inconsolable longing. Let's read some of them. From Mere Christianity. If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world, in an encounter with light. How could an idiotic universe have produced creatures whose mere dreams are so much stronger, better, subtler, and subtler than itself? Do fish complain of the sea for being wet? Or if they did, would the fact itself not strongly suggest that they had not always been, or would not always be, purely aquatic creatures? If you are really the product of a materialistic universe, how is it that you do not feel at home? And then from the Pilgrim's Regress, it now seemed that the deepest thirst within him was not adapted to the deepest nature of the world. And the next one's probably my favorite. It's from a transposition and other addresses. It says, in speaking of the desire for our own far-off country, which with we find ourselves even now, I feel a certain shyness. I am almost committing indecency. I am trying to rip open the inconsolable secret in each one of you, a secret which hurts so much that you take your revenge on it by calling it names like nostalgia, romanticism, adolescence. Our commonest expedient is to call it beauty and behave as if that settled the matter. Wadsworth's expedient was to identify it with certain moments in his own past. This is all a cheat. If Wadsworth had gone back to those moments in the past, he would not have found the thing itself, but only the reminder of it. What he remembered would turn out to be itself a remembering. The books or the music in which we thought the beauty was located will betray us if we trust to them. It was not in them, it only came through them. And what came through them was the longing. These things, the beauty, the memory of our own past, are good images of what we really desire. But if they are mistaken for the thing itself, they turn into dumb idols, breaking the hearts of their worshippers. For they are not the thing itself, they are only the scent of a flower we have not found, the echo of a tune we have not heard, news from a country we have never yet visited. The sense that in this universe we are treated as strangers, the longing to be acknowledged, to meet with some response, to bridge some chasm yawns between us and reality is part of our inconsolable secret, our lifelong nostalgia, our longing to be reunited with something from the universe from which we now feel cut off, to be on the inside of some door which we have always seen from the outside, is no mere neurotic fancy, but the truest index of our real situation. And he's got a good number of ones. That's probably my favorite one that talks about the inconsolable longing, though. He's got some really good quotes about joy. It's just a short one from the last battle. There's a kind of happiness and a wonder that makes you serious. It's too good to waste on jokes. Surprised by joy. The very nature of joy makes nonsense of our common distinction between having and wanting. There to have is to want, and to want is to have. And thus, in the very moment in which I long to be so stabbed again, was itself such a stabbing. So when you desire something, that's a joyful experience in and of itself. So you cannot separate the desire from the joy. And from the Pilgrim's Regress again. It does not always take the form of an island. The landlord sends pictures of many different kinds. What is universal is not the particular picture, but the arrival of some message, not perfectly intelligible, which wakes this desire and sets men longing for something east or west of the world, something possessed, if at all, only in the act of desiring it, and so quickly that craving itself becomes craved, something that tends inevitably to be confused with common or even with vile satisfactions lying close at hand, yet which is able, if any man faithfully live through the dialectic of successive births and deaths, to lead him where true joys are found. So this one I really liked. In this one, it's under a section called "The Child and Childlikeness." Critics who treat adult as a term of approval instead of a merely descriptive term cannot be adult themselves. To be concerned about being grown up, to admire the grown up because it is grown up, to blush at the suspicion of being childish, these things are the marks of childhood and adolescence. When I was 10, I read fairy tales in secret and would have been ashamed if I had been found doing so. Now that I am 50, I read them openly. When I became a man, I put away childish things, including the fear of childishness and the desire to be very grown up. That's from On the Three Ways of Writing for Children of Other Worlds. Only those adults who have retained, with whatever additions and enrichments, their first childish response to poetry, unimpaired, can be said to have grown up at all. Mere change is not growth. Growth is the synthesis of change and continuity. There is no continuity, where there is no continuity, there is no growth. To hear some critics, one would suppose that a man had to lose his nursery appreciation of Gulliver before he acquired his mature appreciation of it. If it is not so, if it were, the whole concept of maturity and ripening would be out of place. And then another one, just skipping that one to the final one. The boy does not despise real woods because he has read of enchanted woods. The reading makes all real woods a little enchanted. The boy reading the fairy tale desires and is happy in the fact of desiring, for his mind has not been concentrated on himself as often as it often is in the more realistic story. Yeah, so this is interesting. He talks a lot about the Tao, which is the Chinese belief in absolute morality and truth that governs the world, basically. So in Mere Christianity, there are 2 points I wanted to make. First, that human beings all over the earth have this curious idea that they ought to behave a certain way and cannot really get rid of it. Secondly, they do not in fact behave that way. They know the law of nature, they break it. These two facts are the foundation of all clear thinking about ourselves and the universe we live in. Truth and then allegory of love. Truth and falsehood are opposed, but truth is the norm, not of truth, but of falsehood also. And I'm not sure I understand that entirely, although it seems similar to the idea that a bad man cannot comprehend a good man, but a good man can comprehend both good and bad. When one of the examples he gave is if you're trying to cut down something with the handle of an axe by swinging the handle at the tree instead of the blade, you won't understand what you're doing wrong, even though you know you're doing it wrong. But if you hit, in fact, this might be my example, not his, I don't know. It's comparable to some of his other examples. But if you hit with a blade and you start hitting with the blade, then you'll understand the proper use and the improper use. You'll understand the nature of both the good and the bad. Whereas you only know that the bad is bad. You don't really understand what it is really, or why it's bad, or anything like that. Then this: if nothing is self-evident, nothing can be proved. Similarly, if nothing is obligatory for its own sake, nothing is obligatory at all. So, the thing which I have called for convenience the Tao, and which others may call the natural law or traditional morality, or the first principles of practical reason, or the first platitudes, is not one among a series of possible systems of value. It is the sole source of all value judgments. If it is rejected, all value is rejected. If any value is retained, it is retained. The effort to refute it and to raise a new system of value in its place is self-contradictory. There never has been and never will be a radically new judgment of value in the history of the world. What purport to be new systems, or as they now call them, ideologies, all consist of fragments from the Tao itself, arbitrarily wrenched from their context on the whole and then swollen to madness in their isolation, yet still owing to the Tao and to it alone such validity as they possess. If my duty to my parents is a superstition, and so is my duty to posterity. If justice is a superstition, and so is my duty to my country or my race. If the pursuit of scientific knowledge is a real value, then so is conjugal fidelity. Not sure what that is. The rebellion of new ideologies against the Tao is a rebellion of the branches against the tree. If the rebels could succeed, they would find they had destroyed themselves. The human mind has no more power of inventing a new value than of imagining a new primary color, or indeed of creating a new sun and a new sky for it to move in. Outside the Tao, there is no ground for criticizing either the Tao or anything else. Does a permanent moral standard preclude progress? On the contrary, except on the supposition of a changeless standard, progress is impossible. If good is a fixed point, then it is at least possible that we should get nearer and nearer to it. But if the terminus is as mobile as the train, how can the train progress towards it? Our ideas of good may change, but they cannot change either for better or worse if there is no absolute and immutable good to which they can approximate or from which they can recede. We can go on getting a sum more and more nearly right only if one perfectly right answer is stagnant. If good means only the local ideology, how can those who invent the local ideology be guided by any idea of good themselves? The very idea of freedom presupposes some objective moral law which overarches rulers and ruled alike. Unless we return to the crude and nursery-like belief in objective values, we perish. From the book The Discarded Image, it says, no doubt if A is good for its own sake, we may discover by reasoning since B is the means to A, therefore B would be a good thing to do. But by what sort of deduction and from what sort of premises could we reach the proposition A is good for its own sake? This must be accepted from some other source before the reasoning can begin. At least one kind of thought, logical thought, cannot be subjective and irrelevant to the real universe, for unless thought is valid, we have no reason to believe in the real universe. We reach our knowledge of the universe only by inference. The very object to which our thought is supposed to be irrelevant depends on the relevance of our thought. A universe whose only claim to be believed rests on the validity of inference must not start telling us that inference is invalid. I conclude then that logic is a real insight into the way in which real things have to exist. In other words, the laws of thought are also the laws of things in the remotest space and in the remotest time. And then in Mere Christianity, when you are arguing against him, you are arguing against the very power which makes you able to argue at all. And this one's really interesting. I'm not sure if I understand fully, but it's in English literature in the 16th century. Morality or duty never yet made a man happy in himself or dear to others. It is shocking, but it is undeniable. We do not wish either to be or to live among people who are clean or honest or kind as a matter of duty. We want to be and to associate with people who like being clean and honest and kind. The mere suspicion that what seemed an act of spontaneous friendliness or generosity was really done as duty subtly poisons it. Actually, yeah. In philosophical language, the ethical category is self-destructive. Morality is healthy only when it is trying to abolish itself. In theological language, no man can be saved by works. So, yeah, I guess I do understand that. That probably wasn't the one I was thinking of. But, yeah. Oh, this is a good one. When one man said to me 300 years ago, people in England were putting witches to death. Was that what you would call the rule of human nature or right conduct? But surely the reason we do not execute witches is that we do not believe there are such things. If we did, if we really thought that there were people going about who had sold themselves to the devil and received supernatural powers from him in return, and were using these powers to kill their neighbors or drive them mad or bring bad weather, surely we would all agree that if anyone deserved the death penalty, these filthy Queaslings did, or Quaislings or whatever. There is no difference of moral principle here. The difference is simply a matter of fact. It may be a great advance in knowledge to not believe in witches, but there is no moral advance in not executing them when you do not think they are there. You would not call a man humane for ceasing to set mouse traps if he did so because he believed there were no mice in the house. This one I really like as well. We might try to make out that when you say a man ought not to act as he does, you only mean the same as when you say that a stone is in the wrong shape, namely that what he is doing happens to be inconvenient to you. But this is simply untrue. A man occupying the corner seat in the train because he got there first, and a man who slipped into it while my back was turned and removed my bag are both equally inconvenient. But I blame the second man, and do not blame the first. I am not angry except perhaps for a moment before I come to my senses, with a man who trips me by accident. I am angry with a man who tries to trip me up, even if he does not succeed. Yet the first has hurt me and the second is not. The next one's also good here. Moral law does not give us any grounds for thinking that God is good in the sense of being indulgent or soft or sympathetic. There is nothing indulgent about the moral law. It's as hard as nails. It tells you to do the straight thing, and it does not seem to care how painful or dangerous or difficult it is to do. If God is like the moral law, then he is not soft. And I think that's a very fair evaluation. It sounds a little, rough and all, but truly anybody who really loves someone else will not seek to shelter them from reality, because in the end that does not bring them any happiness or any growth. And so I intend with my kids, when I have kids, and in conjunction with my wife, I intend to be strict, like what the world would at least consider strict, and have expectations of them that they may not think are fair, or that they think are more restrictive than what other kids have. But the truth is, you cannot destroy someone's agency. But having expectations of them is much more loving than having no expectations. So and then, I really love this one as well. This is from The Problem of Pain, chapter 4. God may be more than moral goodness. He is not less. The road to the promised land runs past Sinai. The moral law may exist to be transcended, but there is no transcending it for those who have not first admitted its claims upon them and then tried with all their strength to meet that claim and fairly and squarely faced the fact of their failure. And this, I think, is very applicable to many people who profess to be good, and yet they do a lot more telling other people what to do than doing themselves. They seek to elevate the two great commandments. They claim to elevate this. I mean, because the two great commandments are above the 10 commandments, right? But if you are following those, you will be keeping the Lord's commandments. If you love me, keep my commandments. But people will say they'll elevate the neighbor above God, actually, is what they do, or say they elevate their neighbor above God, which they don't actually technically. If you try to do that, you're destroying the whole thing. But as he said, the road to the promised land runs past Sinai. The moral law may exist to be transcended, but there is no transcending it for those who have not first admitted its claims upon them. So when people are saying that it's okay to steal or to break commandments, or like say the law of chastity, they say it's okay to break the law of chastity if you love someone. They're attempting to, in the name of love, break a commandment. And whenever you're in the name of love breaking one of those 10 commandments, you're actually not keeping that commandment of love. It's a perversion of that Satan tries to put forward. And there's political applications for this too, although they're not quite as clear cut. But I would posit that taxing people, taxing a large group of people to pay for the minority, and giving them health care or what have you. I believe that is immoral, because what you're literally doing is you're forcing somebody to do something for someone else, and not giving them anything back from it. You're taking a gun to somebody's head, and you're saying, give your money to these people or you go to jail, which is eventually like the end of any law. That the government is just a gun wielding machine. And it's definitely necessary. And I'm not against entirely, like I'm not militantly against government provided healthcare. I think it's inefficient. I think I don't think it does a very good job. There's lots of shortages that come, and attempting to pump money into it doesn't make it more efficient, and it doesn't fix problems. But anyway, any time where you have a third party spending, just reality kicks in and it becomes less efficient. You have to have people who are responsible for the money they're paying, where it's actually at least in part coming out of their pocket, and anyway. But yeah, I think that's another example of saying in the name of love, saying it's okay to break one of the 10 commandments. It's definitely, if you're going to pull that trick, that's one of the better ones to do. Keep providing healthcare to the poor. But I think it's better for people to give up their own money to charity as they will and as they can. And if that does cause shortages, in comparison, if in the alternate universe, people who are not being forced to pay money to the government just end up not paying more money to charity, that's just the way things go. Life's not fair, and trying to force people to do the right thing is Satan's plan. So in the end, it's better to go with the choice that respects agency. So, And there are people who say that government at all should be abolished. Libertarians, like I don't know if that's classical libertarianism or just like full-on libertarianism, but I'm not all the way to that side, but I lean more libertarian than I do to any other party, because of that basic. If like as one of their prophets, I forget which one. He basically talked about how when you're accepting the law, you're accepting giving some the ability to draft somebody, take them away from their home, and send them out to the front lines to be killed. So you have to be able to think. If you're willing to support the law, this is the effect of your actions. And he also gave the example, we would all like it if our neighbor mowed their lawn. But if you think about laws, if you wanted the government to make your neighbor mow his lawn, would you be willing to take your neighbor and throw him in jail if he does not mow his lawn? And that's obviously a very different. But that's the one that this prophet used. I should really figure out who it was and share it. But it's I mean if you look up politics, general conference, whatever, government, LDS prophets. I mean I'm sure it'll come up on Google. But yeah. Yes, this is an interesting one. It seems kind of similar train of thought. It seems that there is a general rule in the moral universe which may be formulated: the higher and more in danger, the higher the more in danger. Oh yeah, and then the average sensual man who is sometimes unfaithful to his wife, sometimes tipsy, always a little selfish, now and then within the law, a trifle sharp in his deals, is certainly, by ordinary standards, a lower type than the man whose soul is filled with some great cause to which he will subordinate his appetites, his fortune, and even his safety. But it is out of the second man that something really fiendish can be made. An inquisitor, a member of the Committee of Public Safety. It is great men, potential saints, not little men, who become merciless fanatics. Those who are readiest to die for a cause may easily become those who are readiest to kill for it. We must not overvalue the relative harmlessness of the little sensual, frivolous people. They are not above but below some temptations. So, and the next one, of all bad men, religious bad men are the worst. Of all created beings, the wickedest one is one who originally stood in the immediate presence of God. And then in a humanitarian theory of punishment, of all tyrannies, a tyranny sincerely exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive. It may be better to live under robber barons than under omnipotent moral busybodies. So, and then what I was going to say is about the healthcare. I'm against it in principle, against government healthcare. I think where it's at right now, although a burden is bearable, but the point to which people want to take it, many people want to take it, and I mean, everybody likes free stuff, right? If somebody's on the end where they're going to be getting the money instead of having the money taken away, which is going to be the majority of people, or I'm not really sure how to say that. It depends on where it's defined, but it could become the majority of people taking it away from the minority of people, which is basically what a progressive tax is. And so, what I'm against is less of where things are now, because as my dad has said, and I really do respect his political opinions, although I disagree with some of his conclusions sometimes. When you try to roll back a government program and remove entitlement programs, you can end up causing a lot of damage to the people who are already there. And so trying like militantly to abolish that type of thing, it seems to me, is not really a good way to go about it. And I've read quotes and stuff that I agree with. Is if you're not militantly against it, um, nothing's going to happen. And I think that's probably correct. Although, yeah, I think it's just going to keep getting worse unless you militantly abolish it. But I don't think it's going to be militantly abolished. And I think a moderate opinion, such as the one I would adopt, would be more influential in slowing the process down. And so my opinion then is that any entitlement program where it is, no matter what the need is, I mean, there's always more needs. You can always create more entitlements. There's no shortage of that. There's no limit to where that can be taken. I mean, you can call the end game communism, but I mean, it is basically any entitlement program that now exists. I think should not be added to. Um, if anything, cut off the life support, let it slowly dwindle away. Um, but obviously not trying to take it out immediately, but letting it just making sure that no more entitlement programs are added. I think that is a cause I could militantly pursue. Um, and and there's always that does not mean that people will say that because because I would say that or because someone else says that you don't care for the poor. Now that's just straight up false. That's not even true. You you can't equate those two things. Because that whether or not somebody agrees with taking other people's money or taking everybody's money and giving it to a few people, even if they're giving some of the money themselves, whether or not you agree with that does not say whether or not you care about the poor. Everybody is capable of giving some of their own money to charity, and people can be against the government taking everyone's money and giving it to somebody, or taking a portion of everyone's money and giving it to a group of people. And they can be completely opposed to that, but still giving charity. In fact, and I don't have the statistics for this. I'm not really interested in the statistics as much as I maybe ought to be. But the reason why is because these concepts are so basic and so obvious that I don't feel a need to see all these statistics. And the people that I listen to, of course, are quoting statistics often. Um, and I've checked some of them, and I continue checking. I don't think data is not important, but to spend a ton of time trying to prove it just doesn't seem to me like it's really worth it. I don't have that kind of time really, or I don't. It's not that high on my priority list. But I mean, if you just think about it, when you have say like a progressive tax, I mean, rich people. Once you get above a certain level, the quality of your life does not improve with money. But um, the the basic thing that seems to be wrong to me with a progressive tax is that it's possible to have the majority of people voting to take the money from the minority of people. So they can just vote, yeah, I think we'd like to take that guy's money. Yeah, sounds good. He really doesn't need it, which is true. Yeah. So as long as it's not going to hurt somebody too much, it's fine to take their money. Which, I mean, once again, I mean, there's reasons why people are on both sides of the argument. It is kind of nice to take people's money when they can afford it. Robin Hood, right? We all like that guy. That was a progressive tax of sorts levied by the man of the people. Um, but I don't think it makes it moral just because it's nice and doesn't hurt them too much. Yeah. Anyway, interesting thoughts. So So when we cease to consider what the criminal deserves and consider only what will cure him or deter others, we have uh, tacitly removed him from the sphere of justice altogether. Instead of a person, a subject of rights, we now have a mere object, a patient, a case. It's from the humanitarian theory of punishment as well. From that hideous strength, do you place yourself in obedience, said the director, in obedience to Maladil? Sir, said Jane, I know nothing of Maladil, but I place myself in obedience to you. It is enough for the present, said the director. This is the courtesy of deep heaven, that when you mean well, he always takes it that you have meant better than you knew. It will not be enough for always. He is very jealous. He will have you for no one but himself in the end, but for tonight is enough. And then, under the section of reality, suppose we've only dreamed or made up all those things, trees, grass, sun, moon, and stars, and Aslan himself. Suppose we have, and all I can say is that in that case, the made-up things seem a good deal more important than the real ones. Suppose this black pit of a kingdom of yours is the only world. Well, it strikes me as a pretty poor one, and that's a funny thing when you come to think of it. We're just babies making up a game, if you're right. But 4 babies playing a game can make a play world which licks your real world hollow. That's why I'm going to stand by the play world. I'm on Aslan's side, even if there isn't any Aslan to lead it. I'm going to live as like a Narnian as I can, even if there isn't any Narnia. And then that's from the Silver Chair. And then in Letters to Malcolm, it says, don't talk to me of the illusions of memory. Why should what we see in the moment be more real than what we see from 10 years' distance? It is indeed an illusion to believe that the blue hills on the horizon would still look blue if you went to them. But the fact that they are blue 5 miles away and the fact that they are green when you're on them are equally good facts. On this one, I also like in a preface to Paradise Lost, Chapter 8. Certain things, if not seen as lovely or detestable, are not being seen correctly at all. So. When an accusation always implies a standard. You call a man cruel or idle because you have in mind a standard of kindness or diligence. And while you're making the accusation, you have to accept the standard as a valid one. If you begin to doubt the standard, you automatically doubt the cogency of your accusation. If nothing is certainly right, then of course it follows that nothing is certainly wrong. If a brute and a blackguard made the world, then he also made our minds. If he made our minds, he would also have made the very standard of them whereby we judge him to be a brute and a blackguard. And how can we trust that what comes from such a brutal and blackguardly source, if we reject him, and how can we trust what standard comes from such a brutal and blackguardly source? If we reject him, we ought to reject all his works. But one of his works is the very moral standard by which we reject him. If we accept this standard, then we are in reality implying that he is not a brute, blackguard. If we reject it, we have thrown away the only instrument by which we can condemn him. Every sane and civilized man must have a set of principles by which he chooses to reject some of his desires and to permit others. One man does this on Christian principles, another on hygienic principles, another on sociological principles. The real conflict is not between Christianity and nature, but between Christian principle and other principles in the control of nature. For nature, in the sense of natural desire, will have to be controlled anyway, unless you're going to ruin your whole life. The Christian principles are admittedly stricter than others, but then we think you will get help towards obeying them, which you will not get towards obeying others. I believe in political equality. There are 2 opposite reasons for being a Democrat. You may think that all men are so good they deserve a share in the government of the Commonwealth. They are so wise that the Commonwealth needs their advice. That, in my opinion, is the false romantic doctrine of democracy. On the other hand, you may believe fallen men to be so wicked that not one of them could be trusted with any irresponsible power over his fellows. That I believe to be the true ground of democracy. I do not believe that God created an egalitarian world. I believe the authority of parent over child. I believe the authority of parent over child, husband over wife, learned over simple to have been as much a part of the original plan as the authority of man over beast. Equality is for me in the same position as clothes. It is the result of the fall and the remedy for it. Any attempt to retrace the steps by which we have arrived at the egalitarianism and to reintroduce the old authorities on the political level is, for me, as foolish as it would be to take off our clothes. The Nazi and the nudist make the same mistake, but the naked body is still there beneath the clothes of each one of us, which really lives in the hierarchical world, still alive and very properly hidden behind facade. I forget how to say that word, of equal citizenship, which is our real concern. And this next one also. It is idle to say that men are of equal value. If value is taken in a worldly sense, if we mean that all men are equally useful or beautiful, or good or entertaining, then it is nonsense. If it means that all are of equal value as immortal souls, then I think it conceals a dangerous error. The infinite value of each human soul is not a Christian doctrine. God did not die for man because of some value he perceived in him. The value of each human soul, considered simply in itself out of relation to God, is zero. As Paul writes, to have died for valuable men would not have been divine, but merely heroic. God died for sinners. He loved us not because we were lovable, but because he is love. And it may be that he loves all equality. It may be that he loves all equally. He certainly loved all to the death. I'm not certain what the expression means if there is equality in his love. If there is equality, it is in his love, not in us. Okay. And like that is to say, the worth of souls maybe it is great in the sight of God, but the question of we may be equal in his eyes to a point, and definitely we are of a non-infinite value, or I don't know. I'm not sure how correct C.S. Lewis was saying that the infinite value of each human soul is not a Christian doctrine, because I would say that we are of infinite worth, but I'm not sure about value. So obviously, our usefulness is zero with respect to God. Our worth, how much he values us, is infinite in his eyes. The worth of the soul is great in the sight of God. It is his work and his glory to bring to pass the immortality and eternal life of man, as it says in Doctrine and Covenants. But I guess it depends on how you're defining value. If value is usefulness, then our value is zero. And if our value is worth in God's eyes, then our value is infinite. But yeah. Equality is a quantitative term, and therefore love often knows nothing of it. Authority exercised with humility and obedience, accepted with delight, are the very lines along which our spirits live. Even in the life of the affections, much more in the body of Christ, we step outside that world which says, I am as good as you. It's like turning from a march to a dance. It is like we are taking off our clothes. We become, as Chesterton said, taller when we bow. We become lowlier when we instruct. It delights me that there should be moments in the services of my own church where the priest stands and I kneel. As democracy becomes more complete in the outer world and opportunities for reverence are successfully removed, the refreshment, the cleansing and invigorating returns to inequality which the church offers us become more and more necessary. The demand for equality has two sources. One of them is among the noblest. The other is the basest of human emotions. The noble source is the desire for fair play, but the other source is the hatred of superiority. Equality outside of mathematics is a purely social conception. It applies to man as a political and economic animal. It has no place in the world of the mind. Beauty is not democratic. She reveals herself more to the few than to the many. Virtue is not democratic. She is achieved by those who pursue her more hotly than most men. Truth is not democratic. She gives special talents and special industry in those she demands special talents and special industry in those to whom she gives her favors. Political democracy is doomed if it tries to extend its demand for equality into these higher spheres. Ethical, intellectual, or atheistic democracy is death. A truly democratic education, one which will preserve democracy, must be in its own field ruthlessly aristocratic and shamelessly highbrow. Democracy demands that little men should not take big ones too seriously. It dies when it's full of little men who think they are big themselves. So, pretty cool. And yeah, I mean, the noble, yeah. So, what he said there about the noble source is the desire for fair play. I think that is the truest. Yeah, like the most noble take. So, when we're talking about helping the poor in America through government, well, not through government, just helping the poor, whether it be through government or any other thing. What we need to do is put them in a situation where they have an equal opportunity to progress. So there's nothing standing in their way that's not standing in everyone else's way. So
She has a condition I don't remember.
So if you think about that as in terms of school, people who don't seem to be as good at learning, there are no there's nothing that they have or that other people have to get better grades and better whatever. There's nothing those people have that they do not. Everybody has the same opportunity in school, and yet some people do better than others. And so, if you were to try to apply, these like ideas about equality and stuff in like a classroom, for example, where you distribute the grades to make it more equal, a progressive grade tax, where the person who does nothing gets like 10% of the grade from the people who get A's. So it brings the people with A's down to B's, and then the peoples with F's down up to, well, if they're doing nothing, they stay at F, but they've got at least 10% of an F. Yeah, I mean, like basically, the only things that ought to be eradicated in our society with respect to inequality are inequalities of opportunity. And when you do that, the people who tend the people who do better tend to be people as a group, considered as a group, not all situations, but they tend to be people who work harder. Because, get this, working harder means you'll get stuff. When people work harder, they reap the consequences of that, which are getting more stuff. When they work less, they reap the consequences of that. They get less. And to try to say that like doesn't even apply is just crazy talk. I mean, to try to take that those principles and apply them directly to the real world and say this is all there is. That also is unrealistic. But usually you have to stick with one standard or the other. You can't like claim some kind of mixed standard, because anytime you're trying to claim a mixed standard, like a middle ground between the two, about which one ought to be the standard, which one should, like between the two things, which one should be the standard. If you try to say, well, I just want it to be in the middle, you're really going to be choosing one or the other. It's the people who choose the correct standard or the stricter standard and then deviate from that standard towards the middle over time. But naturally, will like by default will be choosing the more strict standard. Those are the ones who actually do end up doing a lot more good in the world, because their initial assumption is that everybody should work, and then once everybody has worked, some people have some more, and then they say, well, we've got more, we should help these people. But then the people who say, well, the people who work ought to give us stuff, then they don't work. And so the average production of everyone goes down. And of course, those other people are still working. People who chose that standard think that everyone should work. And probably they'll still give some of their stuff to these people. And it might all end up being okay. But the truth is, anytime you adopt the idea that it's okay to receive something without working, you're going to, as a whole, decrease the average prosperity of the community or the country or whatever geography you're considering. And that's just basic principle. This is why I said that I don't care as much about the statistics and facts that actually show all this stuff. I need to learn better to do research, and once I'm better at that, like right now I'm not really sure where to look so well, because I know there are it's easy to find falsified or screwed up statistics, or just plain false statistics. And so knowing where to look, and it's also easier to find. It's also easy to find statistics that support what you're saying, but are falsified, and that. So it goes both ways. So trying to find good research and like exact numbers by a reputable source over a good population is kind of beyond my research skills at the moment, at least within reason. Like, yeah. And if I were to do that, what I would probably do is I would watch some of the videos by like Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro, Steven Crowder, one of these people who are constantly arguing using all this evidence, and who spend their entire life looking at the facts, interpreting them, and then positing their arguments for like a general libertarian principles, to like libertarian leaning type principles. I just listen to what they're citing when people come up and ask a question, and they cite a study or they cite cite anything. I listen to what those sources are, and then I go look up that source, read it, and see if it looks like it's like is it actually, is it taken out of context? What is it looking at? But as a general principle, I think there's a lot that you can get from just common sense, and you don't need to be very well-rounded in all the facts to have the common sense to know that when you tell a group of people that it's okay for them to take money from other people, like that's fine. So morally, it's not bad, as long as you don't hurt those other people too much, or as long, I mean, they're probably gonna be fine, right? Especially with like progressive tax, when people are being once people are actually high enough up in the progressive tax bracket that they're being taxed with a higher bracket, they're making more money than they probably need, unless they have like a larger family and they're, well, actually, I guess with a larger family you have exemptions, so yeah, that takes care of that problem. But yeah, I mean, yeah, but I mean, but the idea that like somebody like my boss, at Culver's, like he literally pays half of the income that comes to the store. So that means at the end of the year, or at the beginning of the year, when he pays his taxes, half of all the profit from the store goes to the government, and he keeps the other half. And now you can say, because he makes a lot of money because he owns 3 different stores, that's totally fine, and perhaps it is. But the truth is, he worked a lot harder than somebody who just has a regular desk job. Even people who are employed and work full-hour days, at least initially, did not work as hard as him. Now that he's actually built the company is over the last 10 years, Maybe in those after those 10 years, he's come down to a point where he's working a comparable level to other people. And he's probably overall the amount of money that he makes for like per all the time he's put in is probably higher. So he is making, you could say, more than he deserves, but that's arbitrary. Um, but he also took a lot more risk in building those companies than somebody who just goes and gets a good, like an engineering job, like one that I would be getting. And he's providing a lot more value to the community in giving jobs to everyone else, and taking the risk himself so that other people don't have to take risk. And in part, it is just choice, life choices. My grandfather was an entrepreneur, and he started like 20 businesses while he was alive. But that was his choice. He had a high risk tolerance, and he would continue to pursue a project despite very high risk. And we need people like that in the world. But it's also good to have people who are not as tolerant to risk, and who are safe in their actions because they won't lose as much at a time. The fluctuations for them is much smaller, and so they kind of keep the overall more steady. Um, but the more people you have that are risk tolerant, the faster the growth will be, the higher the growth will be. And so it's good to have a mixture. And it's the same as like investing portfolios. The higher the risk, the higher the overall growth will be, as like an integral of the returns over time. But yeah, now this is definitely going on for a while, but yeah. So the next one, no man who says I am as good as you believes it. He would not say it if he did. The Saint Bernard never says to the toy dog, nor to the scholar, nor the scholar to the dunce, nor the employable to the bum, nor the pretty woman to the plain. The claim to equality outside of the strictly political fields is made only by those who feel themselves in some way inferior. What it expresses is precisely the itching, smarting, writhing awareness of an inferiority which the patient refuses to accept, and therefore resents. Yes, therefore resents every kind of superiority in others, denigrates it, and wishes its annihilation. Presently he suspects that every mere difference of being he expects every mere difference of being in a claim to superiority. Here's a fellow who says he doesn't like hot dogs. He thinks himself too good for them, no doubt. If they were an honest to God, all right Jones, if they were honest to God, all right Joes, they'd be like me. They have no business being different. It is undemocratic. That's actually from the Screwtape Letters. Kind of interesting. Cut them all down to a level. All slaves, all ciphers, all nobodies, all equals. Thus tyrants could practice, in a sense, democracy. But now democracy can do the same work without any tyranny other than her own. No one need to go through the field with a cane. Little stalks will now of themselves bite off the tops of the big ones. The big ones are beginning to bite off their own and desire to be little stalks. It's kind of funny, actually. Kind of true. You want to be, if you feel like there's things like white shame, for example, where the thing is that all white people are racist, and so you've got to shame yourself to be not racist, which is totally crazy. Like, just because you're born with white skin does not mean that somehow you're going to start hating people with other skin. Like, yeah, there's nothing logical about that. But yeah, they like the people who like will say like actually like fall for that and like shame themselves. That's kind of what C.S. Lewis is talking about, where the big stocks are biting off their own tops and a desire to be little stocks. where people want to be like in the minority or whatever because it gives them status and yeah, just all kind of crazy. They do not get their qualities from a class. They belong to that class because they have those qualities. Yeah. So yeah. The modern reader is apt to start from egalitarian an egalitarian conception, to assume, in fact, that the fair way of dividing a cake between two people is to cut into two pieces. But to this, Aristotle and the most reputable political thinkers between Aristotle's time and Spencer's would have replied at once, it all depends on who the two people are. If A is twice as good a man as B, then obviously justice means giving twice as much cake as B. But for justice is not equally simpliciter, but proportional to equality. Proportional equality. When this principle is applied to things more important than cakes, justice becomes the art of allotting carefully graded shares of honor, power, liberty, and the like to various ranks of a fixed social hierarchy. And when justice succeeds, she produces a harmony of differences. So, I think a good example of this is but I guess back to the exemptions with tax. So some might say, well, it's your own choice to have kids, so you shouldn't have that exemption to taxes, right? Um, a man who's married but does not have any kids and his wife choose not to have any kids should be taxed the same as a man who, or vice versa, the man who has 10 kids, he and his wife have 10 kids, should be taxed the same as the man who, with his wife, has chosen to have no kids. And people would make that concept, but there's a value judgment there. What are they giving to society? And I mean, 10 kids is a lot, right? But um, those 10 kids will end up giving more to society. Like society needs to have a replacement birth rate, right? Like a minimum of a two person replacement birth rate just to continue to exist, to not die over time. And so it's fulfilling that one need specifically for one. And then the support of the previous generations uh, it supports that as well. When you have a pyramid where the top is the older people and the bottom is the younger generation, and it's just a normal pyramid, it's much more stable because the building of roads and the building of everything and the public services that everybody uses has an increased base of people paying for it, so it's less per person. But when you try to invert that the other way, have less children, it creates all kinds of economic problems. It's bad for society, basically. And people say, oh, we're going to overpopulate the earth. Well, I actually was doing some math, and it's kind of cool. So, assuming this is a kind of a joke, actually, assuming that you populated the earth initially with Mormons, Mormon members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We're not supposed to refer to ourselves as Mormons, but so people who everybody had four children in their lifetime, lived to the age of 100 years old, and they so they all have four children, lived to 100 years old. From the first generation to the 400th generation, which is right about now. So if Adam and Eve are the first two, and then the 400th generation is us. Assuming they didn't kill each other off, everyone lived 100 years. Everybody had four children. The population of the world right now would be 5.28 octadecatillion, which is 5.28 times 10 with 120 zeros after it. Or 100, 10 to the 120. So 5.28 or 528 with 118 zeros following it. So like you write it on a piece of paper, it's like that long. It's a big number. I think you might be able to all stretch out and reach the stars or something. I don't know. But um, so yes, there would be a limit on population. We are not even close to the limit of what the Earth can handle right now, especially with the increases in technology and stuff like that. Like Israel, Israel is a very good example of a civilized or society that does a good job with their natural resources. They use they will distill quite cheaply lots of their water from the Mediterranean Sea, and then they reuse their water. That like they drink it, they flush it down the toilet, and then it goes out into fields and stuff. And they use it to water their fields, and they're all in all they're just very very good at what they do. And there's also a technology that can quite reasonably, even right now, just distill water from the air, just the humidity in the air, and put it in a cup for you. Um, and like they've had competitions to like minimize the cost of that. And if I understand right, it's like pretty good, like a cent for a cup or something like that. Like that's more expensive than water now, but like regular city water, but it's still like not that bad. Like if we needed to, we could definitely just be adopting that kind of technology. So water is taken care of. Food, there's plenty of land to work. We actually there's lots of land that's specifically um, incentivized not to be made because people will make too much food, and then just goes bad, doesn't get spent. Um, so interesting topic, but yeah. So we're not even near that point yet. But the artificial limits of population are just I would consider them evil. Um, for many reasons, the religious reasons being foremost, the belief that everybody who comes to this earth is a child of God, that part of the plan is that we come to this earth, experience life and difficulties, and then have the opportunity to return to Heavenly Father. Um, but yeah, and so when you choose to limit the number of children, you're limiting the number of people who can come, um, and denying them a life, really. Um, People say, well, life sucks, but life is what you make of it. It can be very very hard, and I personally cannot relate to a very difficult life in the same way that many others can. Although there's a lot of people who would take the position that their life is very difficult, whose lives are much easier than mine as well. Um, I am I am a college kid paying for all of my living expenses. Um, my parents did help me pay for my mission, which is good. But um, yeah, so and the comparison really doesn't matter that much. I don't think. It's like, especially yeah, just looking at where people are now, looking at the past. It's better to look forward to the future and just try to make the opportunity equal for all, and then give according to what people want. And people's actions will reflect their priorities. Um, One of my priorities is making money. Um, it's not it's not it's not the top priority. It's in the B category, the important category, because it's necessary for raising a family. In fact, it might be like depending. It could be either the low A or the high B category. If any of you watched the time management video I put, um, but oh, I lost my train of thought. It's been derailed. It means I'm probably talking too long. Um, Proper use of objects. So the first qualification for judging any piece of workmanship from a corkscrew to a cathedral is to know what it is and what it was intended to do and how it is meant to be used. So in religion, as in war and everything else, comfort is the one thing you cannot get by looking for it. If you look for truth, you may find comfort in the end. If you look for comfort, you will not get either comfort or truth. Only soft soap and wishful thinking to begin with, and in the end, only soft soap and wishful thinking to begin with, and in the end, despair. We become no more bad men by thinking of badness than we become triangular by thinking of triangles. Games are essentially for pleasure, but they happen to produce health. They are not likely, however, to produce health if they are played for the sake of it. Conquest is an evil productive of almost every other evil, both to those who commit and those who suffer it. This one is actually really interesting. Many things, such as loving, going to sleep, or behaving unaffectedly, are done worst when we try hardest to do them. And that one specifically, I was thinking of um, when you're trying hard to love somebody. Um, I was thinking of it specifically with respect to a situation I was in, um, where I really felt I was in love, and I attempted to act on it, and I did a really bad job of communicating. Well, not communicating it, but yeah, it was done. It was done worst as I was trying hardest to do it. Um, it's got to be a natural thing. You cannot choose. Um, you cannot choose to love in the same way that you can choose to act on duties. And it kind of goes back to that other quote about um, morality or duty. Um, and the mere suspicion of what seemed to be an act of spontaneous friendliness or generosity was really done as a duty, it subtly poisons it. So, yeah, it's people can usually see if it's if if what you're doing out of desire to actually do it because you like the thing itself, or if you're doing it out of a sense of duty, or a professed sense of duty, or whatever, or if you're doing it because you want recognition. It's people see through that very, very quickly. Um, what I like about experience is that it's such an honest thing. You may take any number of wrong turnings, but keep your eyes open, and you will not be allowed to go very far before the warning signs appear. You may have deceived yourself, but the experience is not trying to deceive you. The universe rings true whenever you fairly test it. If individuals live only 70 years, then a state, or a nation, or a civilization which may last for 1,000 years is more important than an individual. But if Christianity is true, then the individual is not only more important, but incomparably more important, for he is everlasting, and the life of a state or civilization, compared with his, is only a moment. Can a mortal ask questions which God finds unanswerable? Quite easily, I should think. All nonsense questions are unanswerable. How many hours are there in a mile? Is yellow square or round? Probably half the questions we ask. Half of our great theological and metaphysical problems are like that. Heaven will solve our problems, but not, I think, by showing us subtle reconciliations between all our apparently contradictory notions. The notions will be knocked out from under our feet. We will see that there never was any problem. So this is, religion and no religion. So as you know, he was an atheist. As I said at the beginning of the video here, C.S. Lewis was an atheist, and this is from Surprised by Joy. He said, I was at this time living like so many atheists, or anti-atheists, or anti-theists, in a whirlwind of contradictions. I maintained that God did not exist. I was also very angry with God for not existing. I was equally angry with him for creating a world. The notion that everybody would like Christianity to be true, and therefore all atheists are brave men who have accepted the defeat of their deepest desires, is simply impudent nonsense. Interesting. Men are reluctant to pass over the notion of an abstract and negative deity to the living God. I do not wonder. Here lies the deepest taproot of pantheism, of the objection to traditional imagery. It was hated not at the bottom because it pictured him as a man, but because it pictured him as a king, or even as a warrior. The pantheist's God does nothing, demands nothing. He is there if you wish for him, like a book on the shelf. He will not pursue you. There is no danger at any time. Heaven and earth should flee away at his glance. The difficulty in preaching Christ in India is that there's no difficulty. One is up against true paganism, the best sort of it, as well as the worst. Hospitable to all gods, naturally religious, ready to take shape, ready to take any shape, but able to retain none. Now that I am a Christian, I do have moods in which the whole thing looks very improbable. But when I was an atheist, I had moods in which Christianity looked terrible, terribly probable. In letters to Malcolm again here, he has substituted religion for God, as if navigation were substituted for arrival, or battle for victory, or wooing for marriage, or in general, the means for the end. But even in this present life, there is a danger in the very concept of religion. It carries the suggestion that this is one more department of life, an extra department added to the economic, the social, the intellectual, the recreational, and all the rest. Fascism and communism, like all other evils, are potent because of the good they contain or imitate. And of course, their occasion is the failure of those who left humanity starved of that particular good. This does not, for me, alter the conviction that they are very bad indeed. That is really interesting. I really like that. I didn't notice this before, but the thing that their occasion is the failure of those who left humanity starved of that particular good. The reason why there are, for example, government programs that will pay for the health care of those who do not have health care is because nobody gave charity to take care of the problem. So the occasion of a system like that is the failure of those who left humanity starved of this particular good, healthcare. In that case, or with communism, things weren't good enough, I guess, and so they made it a lot worse with communism. But if people were doing enough good in the first place, I guess that's. I mean, I don't think this translates directly, but with the government and healthcare, it does translate pretty well. Because with communism, it's less of things are going bad, but don't you hate life and we'll give you free everything for nothing or something like that, which is a pitch you can make no matter where people are, because being content is defined by your expectations or your desires and stuff like that. So you can be not content with $1 million, but you can be content with 10. It all depends on your perspective. But with something like healthcare, where people really need healthcare, and people want to be able to give it, is the fact that people do not give enough charity to pay for the healthcare of those who don't have it, either through no fault of their own, or who don't work for it. It's the failure of giving charity to those type of people that creates the need, or does not eliminate the need, and therefore, causes the occasion for implementation of such programs. When you accepted the exodus of Israel from Egypt as a type of the soul's escape from sin, you did not, on that account, abolish the exodus as a historical event. Some people conclude, when they say that a thing is meant metaphysically, conclude from that it is hardly meant at all. They think rightly that Christ spoke metaphorically when he told us to carry the cross. They wrongly conclude that carrying the cross means nothing more than leading a respectable life and subscribing moderately to charities. They reasonably think that hellfire is a metaphor, and unwisely conclude that it means nothing more serious than remorse. They say that the story of the fall in Genesis is not literal, and then they go on to say that it was really a fall upwards, which is like saying that because my heart is broken contains a metaphor, therefore it means I feel very cheerful. This mode of interpretation I regard frankly as nonsense. For me, the Christian doctrines, which are metaphorical, or which have become metaphorical with the increase of abstract thought, means something which is just as supernatural as shocking after we have removed the imagery as it was before. Our age has indeed coined the expression "the Bible as literature." It is a very generally implied to those who have rejected its theological pretensions, nevertheless continue to enjoy it as a treasure treasure house of English prose. It may be so. There may be people who, having not been forced upon familiarity with it by believing parents, have yet been drawn to it by its literary charms and then remained as constant readers, but I never happened to meet them. Perhaps it is because I live in the provinces, but I cannot help suspecting, if I may make an Irish bull, that those who read the Bible as literature do not read the Bible. Unless the religious claims of the Bible are again acknowledged, its literary claims will, I think, be given only mouth honor, and that decreasingly. Odd the way the Bible is read, the more it is translated. Or the less the Bible is read, the more it is translated. That is interesting. Theology says to you, in effect, admit God, and with him the risk of a few miracles, and then I will in return, ratify your faith in uniformity as regards the overwhelming majority of events. The philosophy which forbids you to make uniformity absolute is also the philosophy which offers you solid grounds for believing it to be almost absolute. The being who threatens nature's claim to omnipotence confirms her in lawful occasions. Give us this ha'porth of tar, and we will take the ship. We will save the ship. The alternative is really much worse. Try to make nature absolute, and you find that her uniformity is not even probable. By claiming too much, you get nothing. You get the deadlock as in Hume. Theology offers you a working arrangement which leaves the scientist free to continue his experiments and the Christian to continue his prayers. Don't bother about the idea that God has known for millions of years exactly what you were about to pray. That isn't what it's like. God is hearing you now, just as simply as a mother hears her child. The difference his timelessness makes is that this is now, which slips away from you, even as you say the word now for him, is infinite. Yeah, it seems to me our view with respect to time is very limited because of the time which these natural bodies have to respect. So we can only comprehend things that are happening in the moment, or can only observe the things that are happening in the moment, and try to remember things that have happened in the past, and try to guess things that are happening in the future, that will happen in the future. But if you were not bound by time, I think it would be possible not only to look at one thing and focus on that, but to widen the focus to many things and comprehend many things all at once, depending on your level of intelligence. Um, and you obviously would not be bound by um, any one point in time as we know it. You could go back to the time of Christ and observe him, and then jump forward to the end of the world, observe that, and jump forward to the beginning of the world, or jump backward to the beginning of the world and observe that. Although the forward, backward, and all would not really matter with respect to you, because you could just see each thing at a time. And whether or not you could see it all at once, I don't know. But your opportunity to see any one of them would not be limited as it is now to a very narrow, you know, infinitely thin period of now, you know, kind of interesting. Hmm. Are you not thirsty? Said the lion. I am dying of thirst, said Jill. Then drink, said the lion. May I? Could I? Would you mind going away while I do? Said Jill. The lion answered this only by a look and a very low growl. I daren't come and drink, said Jill. Then you will die of thirst, said the lion. Oh dear, said Jill, coming another step nearer. I suppose I must go and look for another stream then. There is no other stream, said the lion. Is he a man? Asked Lucy. Aslan a man? Said Mr. Beaver sternly. Certainly not. I tell you, he is the king of the wood, and the son of the great emperor beyond the sea. Don't you know who is the king of the beasts? Aslan is a lion. The great lion. Ooh, said Susan. I thought he was a man. Is he quite safe? I should feel rather nervous about meeting a lion. That you will, dearie, make no mistake, said Mrs. Beaver. If there is anybody who could appear before Aslan without their knees knocking, they're either braver than most or just silly. Then isn't he safe? Said Lucy. Safe? Said Mr. Beaver. Did you hear what Mrs. Beaver tells you? Who said anything about safe? Of course he isn't safe. But he's good. He's the king, I'll tell you. No man knows how bad he is until he has tried very hard to be good. A silly idea is current, that good people do not know what temptation means. This is an obvious lie. Only those who try to resist temptation know how strong it is. You find out the strength of a wind by walking against it, not by lying down. A man who gives in to temptation after 5 minutes simply does not know what it would have been like an hour later. That's why the bad people, in one sense, know very little about badness. They have lived a sheltered life by always giving in. We never find out the strength of evil impulse inside us until we try to fight it. And Christ, because he is the only man who never yielded to temptation, is also the only man who knows full well what temptation means. The only complete realist. Welcome, child, he said. Aslan, said Lucy. Lucy, you're bigger. That's because you are older, little one, answered he. But not because you are? I am not. But every year you grow, you will find me bigger. He knew none of the true stories about Aslan the great lion, son of the emperor over sea, and king above all high kings in Narnia. But after one glance at the lion's face, he slipped out of the saddle and fell at his feet. The high king above all kings stooped towards him. He lifted his face, and their eyes met. Then instantly, the pale brightness of the mist and the fierce brightness of the lion rolled themselves together into a swirling glory, and gathered themselves up and disappeared. If God were a Kantian, who would not have us until we came to him from the purest and best motives, who could be saved? It's a good question. I think people should be better judged by their actions than their intent. Only God can judge by intent. We ought to judge by action. So man is not they're not judged by what they say they believe or what they profess, but by what they do. Oh, Aslan, said she, it was kind of you to come. I have been here all the time, said he, but you have just made me visible. Aslan, said Lucy almost a little reproachfully, don't make fun of me, as if anything I could do would make you visible. It did, said Aslan. Do you think I wouldn't obey my own rules? Now, Bree, he said, you poor, proud, frightened horse, draw near, near still, my son. Do not dare not to dare. Touch me, smell me. Here are my paws, here is my tail. These are my whiskers. I am a true beast. Aslan, said Bree in a shaken voice, I am afraid I must be rather a fool. Happy is the horse who knows that while he is still young, or the human either. It means, said Aslan, that though the witch knew the deep magic, there is a magic deeper still which she did not know. Her knowledge goes only back to the dawn of time. But if she could have looked further back, into the stillness and the darkness before time dawned, she would have read there a different incantation. She would have known that when a willing victim who had committed no treachery was killed in a traitor's stead, the table would crack, and death, death itself would start working backwards. That's pretty close to the end of some of my favorite quotes there. Near to the end of Never Mind Awake. It's not full of as many quotes that I like, but this is interesting. Hell is a state of mind. You never said a truer word, and every state of mind left to itself, every shutting up of the creature within the dungeon of its own mind, is in the end hell. But heaven is not a state of mind. Heaven is reality itself, and that it is fully real is heavenly. Well, I think that's just about it. It's probably about time for me to go to bed. Almost 11:30 now. So, yeah. If you have any questions, feel free to send me an email or put a comment if you don't know me, and I may or may not answer.